The mirror's edge. The air was thick with the scent of roses, their petals scattered across the grand ballroom like spilled secrets. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd, her sapphire gown shimmering under the chandelier's light. She was the picture of poise, the perfect diplomat's wife, but her heart raced like a caged bird. Across the room, her husband, Victor, laughed with a group of dignitaries. His smile was effortless, his charm magnetic. Eleanor once adored that smile, believed in its sincerity. But tonight, it grated against her like sandpaper. She turned her attention to the man beside her, Nathaniel. He had always been a shadow in her life, Victor's closest friend and confidant. But over the past year, Nathaniel had become something more. A conspirator in whispers, a keeper of her secrets. "Do you think he knows?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel tilted his head, studying her. Victor sees only what he wants to see. That's his gift. And his flaw. Eleanor's lips tightened. She had loved Victor once, or thought she had. But love had been a mask he wore, hiding his ambition and cruelty. The affair was her rebellion, her way of reclaiming pieces of herself he had stolen. Yet tonight, guilt gnawed at her edges. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of her own deceit or the creeping suspicion that Victor was one step ahead. As the evening wore on, Victor approached her, his hand brushing against her back in a gesture that felt more like a warning than an embrace. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice smooth. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. "You've outdone yourself, as always." His gaze lingered, sharp and probing. "I hope so. There's nothing I value more than loyalty, Eleanor, don't you agree?" Her breath caught, but she nodded. "Absolutely." Victor's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He kissed her cheek and disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, in the solitude of their bedroom, Eleanor confronted her reflection. Her hands trembled as she removed her jewelry, each piece clinking softly against the vanity. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Nathaniel earlier that week when they met in secret. "Regret is a luxury," he had replied. "We do what we must to survive." But survival felt like a fragile excuse now. As Eleanor stared into her reflection, she noticed something she hadn't before, a letter, sealed with Victor's insignia, resting on her pillow. With trembling hands, she broke the seal. The letter was brief, but damning. "Eleanor, the game ends tonight." V. The room spun. Eleanor's mind raced. Had he known all along? Had every glance, every word been a trap? Before she could think further, the door opened. Victor stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Did you enjoy the party?" he asked, his tone eerily calm. "Victor, He raised a hand, silencing her. "I've always admired your cleverness, Eleanor. But cleverness without loyalty, that's unforgivable." In the weeks that followed, the world learned that Eleanor had left the country, vanishing like smoke. But those who knew Victor whispered that his wife's betrayal had cost her dearly. Nathaniel, too, disappeared, though rumors claimed he had been seen boarding a ship bound for nowhere. And Victor? He continued to charm and conquer, his empire growing ever larger. But when the night was quiet, he often stood by the mirror, staring at his reflection and wondering if, in betraying Eleanor, he had also betrayed himself. Eleanor hadn't always been the woman she saw in the mirror, the one cloaked in secrets and poised on the knife's edge of discovery. Once she had been hopeful, brimming with dreams. Her marriage to Victor began as a whirlwind romance, full of grand gestures and promises of a glittering future. Victor had been everything her family wanted for her, a man of influence, intellect, and ambition. But beneath his polished exterior lay a shadow Eleanor only began to see after the wedding. The first crack appeared on their honeymoon. Victor's temper, sharp and sudden, lashed out over a trivial slight by a waiter. His smile returned moments later, as though nothing had happened, but Eleanor couldn't unsee the coldness in his eyes. By the time they returned home, Victor's charm had become a mask he wore less frequently. His affection turned transactional, his words cutting. Eleanor found herself shrinking, her once vivid personality dulled under the weight of his control. She discovered early that questioning Victor was futile. Every argument ended with her apologizing, even when she couldn't remember why. He was a master manipulator, twisting her words and warping reality until she doubted her own perceptions. Years passed, and Eleanor learned to survive by playing her role, the perfect wife, supportive and silent. But survival wasn't living. She longed for freedom, for someone who saw her as more than an extension of Victor's power. Enter Nathaniel. Victor's closest ally, Nathaniel had always been a quiet observer in her life. Unlike Victor, he listened without interrupting, his gaze steady and unjudging. What began as stolen conversations during parties evolved into something deeper. Nathaniel reminded Eleanor of who she once was, bold, curious, and alive. Their affair wasn't born of passion alone, but desperation. With Nathaniel, she found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the gilded cage Victor had built around her. Yet guilt stalked her at every turn. Eleanor despised deceit, but what choice did she have? Victor had stripped her of every other avenue of escape. Eleanor's betrayal wasn't just of her husband. It was a rebellion against the life he had imposed on her. She wanted to reclaim her voice, her agency. The affair with Nathaniel was her way of saying, "I am not yours to control." But as time went on, the lines blurred. She began to question Nathaniel's loyalty. Was he her ally? Or was he playing his own game? And could she ever truly outmaneuver Victor, a man who thrived on power and control? Her motivations, tangled and contradictory, were rooted in survival and a hunger for liberation. Eleanor wasn't proud of her choices, but she didn't regret them either. For the first time in years, she felt like the author of her own story, even if that story was fraught with danger. Eleanor couldn't stop reading the letter. The words burned into her mind. The game ends tonight. She sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her chest tightening with fear. Victor had always been meticulous, his every action calculated. If he had uncovered her betrayal, he wouldn't act in haste. No. Victor thrived on precision, on making his moves with surgical accuracy. Her thoughts shifted to Nathaniel. Had he been careless? Or worse, had he betrayed her too? The possibility clawed at her. She had trusted him, confided in him, but Victor's influence reached far and deep. The door creaked open. Eleanor flinched as Victor entered, his face composed but his eyes burning with quiet fury. He crossed the room with the grace of a predator, stopping just short of her. "You've been busy, haven't you?" he said, his voice low and controlled. Eleanor steadied herself. "I don't know what you're talking about." Victor chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Do you think I built my empire by being blind to treachery? Your little escapade with Nathaniel? It was amusing, really. A momentary distraction." Her blood ran cold. He knew everything. "Did you love him?" Victor asked, tilting his head. Eleanor's instinct was to lie, but something about his gaze told her it wouldn't matter. "What does it matter?" Victor leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "It matters because I decide what you love, Eleanor, and what you lose." The words were a death knell. Eleanor's defiance flickered like a dying flame. Victor straightened, his expression unreadable. "Nathaniel is gone, by the way. I had him reassigned. Far away from here." Her heart sank. Had Nathaniel betrayed her? Or had Victor simply eliminated him before he could intervene? The ambiguity gnawed at her. Victor began to leave, but paused at the door. "Pack your things. You'll be going away for a while. Call it a retreat." You've been under so much stress lately. The threat was clear: exile under his terms. When the door shut, Eleanor's resolve hardened. Victor might think he had won, but she wasn't finished. Betrayal was a blade that cut both ways, and Victor had underestimated her once before. As dawn broke, Eleanor slipped out of the estate with nothing but a small bag and her wits. She would vanish, but not to cower. She had spent too long living under Victor's shadow, and she wouldn't let his revenge be the final chapter of her story. Somewhere out there was Nathaniel, or at least the truth of what had become of him. Eleanor vowed to uncover it and, if necessary, turn it into a weapon. Betrayal had set her free, but it had also forged a new purpose: to take back what Victor had stolen and ensure he paid the ultimate price. The phoenix rises. Eleanor slipped through the shadows of the city like a ghost. Disguised in simple clothes, her sapphire gown abandoned, she blended seamlessly into the throngs of ordinary people, a world Victor had always considered beneath him. For Eleanor, it was liberation. Her destination was clear: the port. Nathaniel's last known location was on a ship heading west, and she needed answers. Victor's words haunted her. I had him reassigned. Reassigned could mean anything in Victor's world: imprisonment, exile, or death. In the flickering light of a waterfront tavern, Eleanor met a man who had served under Nathaniel. He was wary at first, but the promise of gold loosened his tongue. Nathaniel was sent to a facility off the coast, the man said, glancing around nervously. One of Victor's black sites. Few who go there ever come back. Eleanor's stomach turned, but she forced herself to stay calm. Where is it? The man hesitated, then scribbled coordinates on a slip of paper. If you go there, you won't return either. Eleanor tucked the paper into her cloak and left without another word. The journey to the black site was treacherous. She posed as a merchant, bribing her way onto a supply ship bound for the facility. The crew's whispers confirmed her worst fears. The site was a fortress, guarded by Victor's most loyal men. But Eleanor had spent years observing Victor's operations, learning his methods. She knew how to exploit his arrogance. Disguised as a servant delivering supplies, Eleanor gained entry to the facility. The air was heavy with salt and despair, the walls echoing with the muffled cries of prisoners. She kept her head down, her heart pounding, as she searched for Nathaniel. When she finally found him, her breath caught. Nathaniel was gaunt, his face bruised, but his eyes sparked with recognition. "Eleanor?" he rasped, disbelief and relief mingling in his voice. "We don't have much time," she whispered, unlocking his cell with a stolen key. Nathaniel staggered to his feet, leaning heavily on her. "You shouldn't have come." "Victor?" "I'm not afraid of Victor anymore," she said, her voice steel. Together they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding guards and slipping into the night. Eleanor's plan was simple: escape the island and make Victor pay. Weeks later, Victor received a package at his estate. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, and a note. "You underestimated me. The game isn't over." Victor's lips curled into a smile, but his grip on the card tightened. Eleanor's defiance was infuriating and exhilarating. Eleanor and Nathaniel didn't stop with their escape. They began dismantling Victor's empire piece by piece. Using the knowledge Eleanor had gathered during her years at his side, they exposed his corruption to allies and rivals alike. Secrets that Victor had buried resurfaced, eroding his power. For every move Victor made to tighten his grip, Eleanor countered with a revelation or sabotage. She became a phantom in his life, striking from the shadows and disappearing before he could retaliate. Their final confrontation came in the same ballroom where it all began. Eleanor, clad in a sleek black gown, stepped into the room unannounced. Gasps echoed as guests recognized her, the wife who had vanished, now standing as Victor's equal, if not his superior. Victor approached her, his smile venomous. "You've made quite the mess, Eleanor." She raised a glass, her gaze unwavering. I've only just begun. Victor leaned in, his voice a hiss. You think you've won? You're playing my game. She smiled, a predator's smile. No, Victor. I've rewritten the rules. As the evening unfolded, Eleanor's final move came to light. A ledger containing every illicit deal Victor had made, delivered to the authorities. By dawn, his empire crumbled, and he was taken away in handcuffs. Eleanor watched from the balcony, the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold. She had won, but the cost was steep. Revenge had consumed her, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But for the first time in years, she was free. A new dawn, Eleanor stood on the balcony of the villa she now called home, the Mediterranean breeze brushing against her skin. Below, the azure waves crashed against the cliffs, their rhythm steady and unrelenting, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. Victor's empire was in ruins. His loyalists had scattered, many imprisoned or turning on each other to avoid prosecution. Victor himself was awaiting trial in a high-security facility, his once commanding presence reduced to whispers of his former power. Eleanor had no intention of watching his trial. Justice, as far as she was concerned, was already served. But as the days stretched into weeks, a strange restlessness took hold. For so long her life had revolved around survival, then revenge. Without either, she felt unmoored, as though her purpose had vanished with Victor's downfall. Nathaniel, seated on the veranda with a book in hand, seemed to sense her unease. "You've won, Eleanor," he said one evening, looking up from the pages. "You can finally rest." She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Rest isn't what I want. Not anymore." "What do you want?" The question lingered, unanswered. Over the following months, Eleanor began to rebuild, not just her life, but the lives Victor had destroyed. She reached out to those harmed by his schemes, families displaced by his greed, communities ravaged by his manipulations, and individuals who had been silenced by his power. Her efforts began small, a donation here, a quiet intervention there, but soon grew into something larger. She established a foundation dedicated to exposing corruption and aiding its victims. It was her way of turning her pain into something meaningful, of ensuring no one else would endure what she had. Nathaniel became her partner in this endeavor. Their relationship, once forged in secrecy and desperation, evolved into one of mutual respect and shared purpose. While the scars of their betrayal lingered, they found solace in working toward a common goal. But Eleanor never forgot the cost of her vengeance. She visited the graves of those who had fallen in Victor's shadow, offering quiet apologies and promises to honor their memory. One evening, as Eleanor walked through a bustling marketplace, a child ran up to her, holding out a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you, miss," the child said, beaming. Eleanor knelt, accepting the flowers with a smile. "Thank you. They're beautiful." The child's mother approached, her expression one of gratitude. "You don't know us, but your work saved our village. Thank you." Eleanor's throat tightened. She had spent so long focused on destruction that she hadn't realized the extent of what she was building in its place. As she walked back to her villa, the wildflowers in hand, Eleanor finally understood her new purpose. Her life wasn't about erasing the past, but transforming it into something better. The revenge that had once consumed her was no longer a weight, but a stepping stone, a reminder of the strength it took to rise again. Eleanor wasn't just free, she was alive. And for the first time, she wasn't looking back. The first step into shadows, Eleanor's marriage to Victor had been a union of appearances. In the beginning, she believed in the fairy tale he presented, a charming, powerful man who promised her the world. But over time, the cracks in that illusion grew impossible to ignore. Victor was a master manipulator. He wielded his words like weapons, turning Eleanor's fears and insecurities against her. What began as subtle dismissals, cutting off her opinions with a smile, grew into outright cruelty. He belittled her in private, ignored her in public, and treated her as nothing more than an ornament to his success. For years, Eleanor endured in silence. Divorce wasn't an option. Victor had made that clear. "We are a team, Eleanor," he would say, though the team had only one captain. It was during one of Victor's grand parties that Eleanor first truly noticed Nathaniel. He had always been there, Victor's closest ally and confidant. But that night, when Victor left her alone among strangers, Nathaniel approached. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his tone light. Eleanor managed a polite smile. "Is it that obvious?" Nathaniel chuckled. "Only to someone who knows what it's like to feel out of place in this crowd." That simple exchange sparked something in Eleanor. Nathaniel was different from the others in Victor's circle. He didn't flaunt his wealth or power. He listened when she spoke, his attention genuine. Their conversations grew more frequent, slipping into private corners during parties or late-night chats when Victor was away. Eleanor found herself drawn to Nathaniel not just for his kindness, but for how he made her feel, seen, valued, understood. The first time they kissed was in the library of Victor's estate. It had been an accident, or so she told herself. A shared laugh over a book, a glance that lingered too long, and then Eleanor pulled back immediately, guilt coursing through her. "I can't do this." Nathaniel's gaze was steady, though pain flickered in his eyes. "You deserve more than this life, Eleanor. More than him." His words echoed in her mind long after he left. For weeks, Eleanor wrestled with her conscience. She hated the lies, hated herself for wanting something outside her marriage. But every interaction with Victor pushed her closer to the edge. His dismissiveness, his control, it was suffocating. One night, after a particularly humiliating dinner where Victor had openly mocked her in front of his colleagues, Eleanor found herself at Nathaniel's door. She didn't plan it, didn't even know what she would say. When he opened the door, she broke down. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. And in that moment, Eleanor made a choice, not out of lust or rebellion, but out of a desperate need for solace. Their affair began that night, a series of stolen moments that became her refuge. Nathaniel offered her what Victor never had: tenderness, respect, and the freedom to be herself. But even as Eleanor found comfort in Nathaniel's arms, she couldn't escape the shadow of guilt. She knew the risks, knew the consequences if Victor discovered their betrayal. Yet for the first time in years, she felt alive. A web of deceit Eleanor and Nathaniel's affair began cautiously. Their meetings were brief, stolen moments during Victor's frequent absences. At first, it was enough, an exchange of whispers in dimly lit hallways, fleeting touches that left Eleanor's skin tingling long after Nathaniel had gone. But as the weeks turned into months, their connection deepened. Eleanor found herself confiding in Nathaniel, sharing the pieces of her soul she had long buried under Victor's control. Nathaniel listened without judgment, his presence a balm to her wounded spirit. Their trysts became more daring. A secret rendezvous at a secluded inn, a moonlit walk along the estate's gardens while Victor entertained guests inside. Every moment was a gamble, and the stakes grew higher with each passing day. Nathaniel, for his part, was no fool. He understood the danger of their relationship. "If Victor finds out," he warned one night, his voice laced with worry, "he won't just come after me. He'll destroy you, too." Eleanor met his gaze, her determination unshaken. "Victor already destroyed me. You've given me something to fight for." Victor's suspicions were subtle at first. Eleanor had become more withdrawn, her once blank obedience replaced by an undercurrent of defiance. She began to question him in ways she never had before, her words sharper, her gaze unwavering. Victor noticed the way she lingered at parties, her eyes seeking Nathaniel's across the room. He saw how Nathaniel's presence seemed to steady her, how their conversations carried a spark absent from her interactions with anyone else. Victor's suspicions crystallized one evening during a dinner party. Eleanor had laughed, truly laughed at something Nathaniel had said. It was a sound Victor hadn't heard in years, and it set his teeth on edge. Later that night, he confronted her in their bedroom. "You've been different lately," Victor said, his tone casual but his eyes cold. "Distracted," Eleanor forced a smile. "You're imagining things." Victor stepped closer, his presence oppressive. "Am I? You wouldn't be keeping secrets from me, would you?" Her heart raced, but she held her ground. "What secrets could I possibly have?" Victor's smile was sharp, predatory. "None, because I'd find them." Victor's paranoia grew. He began monitoring Eleanor's movements, questioning the staff about her activities. He even planted subtle traps, leaving her alone with Nathaniel during meetings, watching for any sign of impropriety. Eleanor and Nathaniel knew they were being watched. They became more careful, their meetings fewer and farther between. But the strain was palpable. "We can't keep doing this," Nathaniel said one night, his voice heavy with regret. Eleanor's chest tightened. "You're leaving me?" "I'm trying to protect you," he said, taking her hands in his. "Victor isn't a man to cross lightly. If he finds out—" "He won't," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I won't let him." But deep down, Eleanor knew the walls were closing in. Victor was too clever, too ruthless. It was only a matter of time before their betrayal came to light. One fateful evening, Victor finally had the proof he needed. A servant, bribed or coerced, Eleanor never knew, had informed him of her late-night meetings with Nathaniel. Victor didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he laid his trap, watching as she and Nathaniel continued their dangerous dance. And when he struck, it was with calculated precision. The trap closes Victor's confrontation was as meticulously planned as every move he made in life. He chose a stormy night, the kind that rendered the estate isolated and imposing. The rain lashed against the windows, lightning illuminating the grandeur of the main hall where Victor summoned Eleanor and Nathaniel. Eleanor had sensed something amiss when Victor insisted on a private dinner that evening, his charm too practiced, his smiles laced with malice. When she saw Nathaniel standing by the fireplace, his face tense and pale, her heart dropped. Victor stood at the head of the room, swirling a glass of wine. "How lovely to have us all together," he said, his voice dripping with mock warmth. "A family reunion of sorts." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "What is this, Victor?" Victor's smile widened, a predator reveling in the hunt. "I've always appreciated loyalty, Eleanor. It's the foundation of everything I've built. Imagine my disappointment when I discovered cracks in that foundation." Nathaniel stepped forward, his hands clenched. "If you have something to say, say it." Victor turned his gaze to Nathaniel, his expression icy. "Oh, I will. But first, let's give Eleanor the chance to explain. Tell me, my dear, how long have you and Nathaniel been conspiring against me?" Eleanor's breath caught. She could deny it, play the role of the innocent wife. But Victor's tone, the triumphant gleam in his eyes, told her he already knew the truth. "Conspiring?" she said, lifting her chin. "Is that what you call it?" Victor's facade cracked for a moment, his fury breaking through. "Don't play games with me, Eleanor. I've tolerated your defiance long enough." Nathaniel stepped between them. "Leave her out of this. Whatever you think you know, it's me you want." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. How noble and how predictable. "But this isn't just about you, Nathaniel. It's about betrayal. Hers and yours. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think you could humiliate me and walk away unscathed?" Eleanor's fear turned to anger. Humiliate you? You did that to yourself, Victor. You treated me like a pawn in your games, a piece of your collection. I found something you could never give me. Respect. Love. Victor's face darkened, his fury barely contained. You dare lecture me on love? After sneaking around behind my back like a common thief? The room crackled with tension, the storm outside a mirror of the storm within. Victor set his glass down with deliberate care. I could destroy you both, he said, his voice cold. But where's the satisfaction in that? No, I'll let you live, with the knowledge that you've lost everything. Eleanor stepped closer, defiance burning in her eyes. You don't own me anymore, Victor. You may have power, but you'll never have what matters. And I'll make sure the world sees you for what you truly are. A tyrant grasping at control. Victor's smirk returned, though it lacked its usual confidence. Brave words, Eleanor. Let's see how far they take you. With that, he left the room, his footsteps echoing through the hall. Aftermath, Nathaniel and Eleanor stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them. What now? Nathaniel asked, his voice weary. Eleanor looked at him, her resolve hardening. We fight back. Victor wants to destroy us, but he underestimates me. I won't let him dictate my life anymore. Nathaniel nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. He won't make it easy. Eleanor's gaze turned toward the rain-soaked window. He doesn't need to. I've survived worse. From that night forward, Eleanor and Nathaniel worked together, plotting their escape from Victor's reach and laying the groundwork for his downfall. Every move they made was calculated, every step taken with caution. But the betrayal had left its mark on all of them. Victor's rage simmered, fueling his need for revenge. Nathaniel bore the weight of guilt, knowing he had endangered Eleanor's life. And Eleanor, though steadfast in her resolve, carried the scars of a love turned to ashes. Victor's retaliation. Victor was not a man who acted in haste. His anger burned slow and cold, sharpening into a weapon he wielded with precision. In the days following the confrontation, Eleanor and Nathaniel knew better than to believe they were safe. Victor's silence was more unnerving than his threats. The first blow came quietly. Eleanor's bank accounts were frozen, her access to the estate's resources severed. She awoke one morning to find her name erased from the deeds of properties Victor had once paraded as gifts. Letters arrived from charities she had supported, regretfully informing her that her pledges could no longer be honored. For Nathaniel, the retaliation was more direct. Victor spread whispers through the circles of power, branding him a traitor and a thief. Contracts were canceled, alliances dissolved. By the time Nathaniel realized the extent of the damage, his reputation was in ruins. But Victor wasn't finished. His ultimate goal was not to destroy them outright, it was to leave them vulnerable, isolated, and desperate. Eleanor, however, refused to crumble. Fighting back Eleanor's years with Victor had not been wasted. She knew his methods, his secrets, and most importantly, his weaknesses. While Victor sought to strip her of power, Eleanor began building alliances of her own. She reached out to those Victor had wronged. Former associates cast aside when they were no longer useful. Rivals who had suffered under his schemes, and even loyalists who had grown disillusioned by his tyranny. Slowly, she wove a network of allies, each with their own reason to see Victor fall. Nathaniel, though shaken by the collapse of his career, became her most steadfast supporter. Together, they gathered evidence of Victor's crimes, fraud, bribery, extortion, and prepared to expose him. But the cost of their rebellion weighed heavily on their relationship. The strain on Eleanor and Nathaniel. The intensity of their situation left little room for the passion that had once defined their affair. Their connection, once a source of solace, became strained under the pressure of survival. One evening, As they sat in a modest apartment far removed from the grandeur of Victor's estate, Nathaniel broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice low. Eleanor looked up from the papers spread across the table. "Regret what?" "Us. What we did." Eleanor hesitated, her chest tightening. "I regret how it happened," she admitted. "But I don't regret you. You gave me the strength to see what my life had become, and to fight for something better." Nathaniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, though the shadow of guilt remained in his eyes. "I just don't want to be the reason you lose everything." "You're not," she said firmly. "Victor was the one who took everything from me. You're the reason I'm taking it back." Their bond, though tested, endured. It shifted from a whirlwind romance to a partnership forged in adversity, built on trust and a shared determination to reclaim their lives. Victor's fall. The final act of their rebellion came in the form of a public reckoning. Eleanor and Nathaniel's evidence was delivered to the press and authorities, triggering an investigation that rocked Victor's empire to its core. Victor, ever the strategist, attempted to spin the narrative in his favor, but Eleanor was prepared. She stepped into the public eye, sharing her story with a poise that disarmed even the most skeptical observers. She spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor, exposing Victor's manipulation and corruption with undeniable clarity. The world saw her not as the discarded wife of a powerful man, but as a force to be reckoned with. When Victor was finally arrested, the sight of him in handcuffs brought Eleanor no joy, only a profound sense of closure. A new beginning. In the aftermath, Eleanor and Nathaniel left the city that had been their battleground. They chose a quiet life, away from the spotlight, focusing on rebuilding what had been lost. Their relationship was no longer the affair that had begun in secrecy, but a partnership forged in honesty and resilience. Though their journey had been marked by betrayal and loss, they found peace in the knowledge that they had survived and that they had done so together. Eleanor, now free of Victor's shadow, began a new chapter. She dedicated herself to helping others escape the kind of control and manipulation she had endured, becoming a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a future untainted by the past. Eleanor's public reckoning. As the investigation into Victor's criminal empire grew, Eleanor knew that exposing his true nature to the world would be a battle in itself. Victor's resources were vast, his allies influential. But Eleanor had learned from years of being underestimated. She would use his own tactics against him. With Nathaniel by her side, Eleanor coordinated a series of carefully orchestrated interviews with journalists who had once been loyal to Victor, but had grown disillusioned over the years. Each of these insiders came forward with damning evidence, from financial records to witness testimonies. The media, hungry for a scandal of such magnitude, quickly turned their attention to the story. When Eleanor agreed to an exclusive interview, the stakes were higher than ever. She knew the risk of facing the public eye, especially after living in Victor's shadow for so long. But her voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the tension of the moment. "I lived a life built on lies," she said during the interview, her words carefully chosen. "I was a trophy, a symbol of his success, but I was also his prisoner. I watched him destroy lives, manipulate people, and use his power to control anyone who crossed his path. It's time to expose the truth, not just for me, but for all the lives he ruined." The media's response was overwhelming. Eleanor's story became a symbol of empowerment, and her courage in speaking out resonated with many who had once been silenced by Victor's influence. She was no longer a victim. She was a force that demanded justice. Fallout for Victor's allies. Victor's arrest was just the beginning of the unraveling of his empire. As authorities closed in, his loyalists scrambled to protect themselves, but many found themselves caught in the web of corruption and deceit Victor had built. Some, like his trusted enforcers and business partners, turned on him to save themselves. They offered up their knowledge in exchange for immunity, revealing details of bribery, blackmail, and even more heinous crimes. Nathaniel's name, once tarnished by Victor's false accusations, was cleared. He was instrumental in helping authorities dismantle the far-reaching network Victor had established. Many of Victor's associates found themselves under investigation, and some faced charges that would cost them everything. Eleanor, while relieved to see Victor's empire crumble, knew that Victor's allies were still a dangerous force. She wasn't naive enough to think they would simply disappear. Yet she also understood that without Victor's iron grip, they would scatter, each of them too selfish to maintain the unity they once shared. Her next step was to ensure they didn't regain their former power. Eleanor used her newly found influence to expose them in the public eye, collaborating with journalists, activists, and even former victims of Victor's reach to ensure that they were held accountable. A life after the city. After the public reckoning, Eleanor and Nathaniel needed space to heal and rebuild. They left the chaos of the city behind, seeking refuge in a small coastal town far from the prying eyes of media and old acquaintances. They rented a modest cottage on a hillside, the sea a constant presence that reminded them of the vastness of life and possibility. Eleanor, now with the freedom she had long craved, began to explore new passions. She immersed herself in social justice work, not just for victims of corruption, but for those trapped in cycles of poverty and abuse. Her foundation, once an idea born out of anger, became a symbol of hope for many. Nathaniel, too, found peace away from the chaos. He took a quiet job in a local workshop, working with wood and crafts, creating pieces that reflected his inner transformation. The man who had once been defined by ambition and risk now embraced a simpler life, a life built on the steadiness of honest labor and love. But even in their retreat, they weren't untouched by the scars of their past. Eleanor sometimes found herself staring out at the horizon, wondering how she had come to this point, betrayed, broken, and ultimately free. Yet it wasn't just freedom she had gained, but a deeper understanding of herself and the power to shape her future. Nathaniel would often find her lost in thought and, without words, sit beside her, offering quiet companionship. In these moments, they both understood that their relationship had evolved beyond the betrayal that had once brought them together. They had forged a new kind of bond, a partnership rooted not in passion and secrecy, but in mutual respect and shared purpose. They both knew that, though the past could never be fully erased, they had built something worth holding on to. Their love was no longer a secret. They had found a way to be open with each other and with the world. And with that, they looked forward, not to revenge or retribution, but to a life where they could truly be themselves, free. Eleanor's new purpose, helping others. As Eleanor settled into her life in the coastal town, her new foundation became the heartbeat of her transformation. She'd never imagined herself as an activist or philanthropist, but her past had equipped her with a unique understanding of power dynamics, manipulation, and the struggles of those who had been crushed under the weight of injustice. At first, the work was overwhelming. Eleanor met with victims of abuse, financial exploitation, and societal neglect. Their stories often mirrored her own, a lifetime of being silenced, ignored, or used for someone else's gain. She listened to their pain with a depth of empathy few could match, the same empathy that had once been exploited by Victor. Now, however, it became the source of her strength. One evening, she met a woman named Sarah, whose story resonated deeply with Eleanor. Sarah had been married to a wealthy businessman who, like Victor, had treated her as nothing more than a trophy, isolating her from family, controlling her finances, and manipulating her emotions. Sarah had escaped, but she was left without any resources, without a voice, and with a deep sense of shame. Over coffee, Sarah said, I don't even know where to start, Eleanor. I've spent so many years trying to make everyone happy, trying to be the perfect wife, and now I don't know who I am anymore. Eleanor reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you, and I'm here to help you figure that out. This was the moment Eleanor realized the true power of her work. It wasn't just about fighting the systems of corruption. It was about empowering individuals to reclaim their lives. By giving them the tools, support, and validation they needed, Eleanor helped them rebuild their identities, not just as survivors, but as people who deserved happiness, peace, and respect. Her foundation quickly gained recognition for its hands-on, compassionate approach. Eleanor wasn't interested in simply offering donations or vague advice. She took a personal interest in each person's story, connecting them with legal aid, therapy, and support networks. She even began hosting workshops where women, many of whom had been silenced for years, could share their experiences and learn how to advocate for themselves. But as the foundation grew, so did the pressure. Eleanor found herself pulled in countless directions, attending meetings, speaking at events, and handling the intricacies of running a nonprofit. The emotional toll was high, and though she had Nathaniel by her side, it was a lonely existence at times. Emotional struggles and self-discovery. Despite her newfound purpose, Eleanor struggled with the emotional fallout from her past. There were days when the weight of everything she had endured came crashing down on her. Memories of Victor's cruelty, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the guilt of her own infidelity. There were moments when she'd find herself standing in front of a mirror, staring at the woman who had emerged from the wreckage. Am I truly free? She'd wonder. But she also realized that freedom wasn't a singular moment. It was an ongoing process. Each day was a step toward healing, and each success was a testament to her resilience. Nathaniel, though he too carried his own scars, remained her anchor. In quieter moments, he would reassure her that she was not the sum of her past mistakes or pain. You are the woman who survived him, Eleanor, he would say. You are the woman who fought back, who rebuilt her life, and you are more than enough. Though Nathaniel's words were a balm to her wounded soul, Eleanor knew that healing wasn't something that could be rushed. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about helping herself, understanding that the woman she was becoming was not defined by Victor or even by the choices she had made in the past, but by her actions in the present. She began to take more time for herself, allowing space for the things that brought her joy outside of her work. She started painting again, something she had abandoned when Victor had dictated the course of her life. The colors on the canvas became an outlet for her emotions, a way to release the pent-up frustrations and fears that still lingered within her. And in those moments of solitude, she began to reconnect with who she was before Victor's influence had consumed her, vibrant, creative, and unafraid to dream. Afraid. The ripple effect. Eleanor's impact. As the months passed, the impact of Eleanor's work rippled out in ways she hadn't anticipated. The women she helped found their own voices, many of them eventually starting businesses, gaining independence, and even becoming advocates themselves. The community around Eleanor began to shift, with more people understanding the importance of supporting those who had been silenced. One day, Sarah, the woman Eleanor had met early on, came to her with an idea. Eleanor's expanding influence. As the foundation continued to grow, Eleanor found herself at the center of a movement that was larger than anything she had anticipated. Her efforts to expose systemic abuse and empower survivors had sparked a ripple effect, creating a network of activists and advocates who were inspired by her resilience and unwavering commitment to justice. Eleanor was invited to speak at conferences and public forums where her voice resonated with people from all walks of life. She became a sought-after figure for media interviews, and her story, once a quiet tale of betrayal, had now become a beacon of hope for countless others. But despite her increasing influence, Eleanor remained grounded in her original mission. She continued to work closely with individuals, refusing to let her platform overshadow the personal connections that had been the foundation of her success. She was determined to show that true change came not from fame or recognition, but from the collective strength of those willing to stand together. One of her most significant initiatives was a mentorship program that paired survivors of abuse with mentors who had walked similar paths. It wasn't just about offering advice, it was about creating a safe space where women could share their stories, heal together, and rebuild their sense of self-worth. Through this program, Eleanor saw the true power of community. Women who had once felt isolated found solidarity, and those who had been beaten down by life circumstances discovered that they had the power to change their own narratives. Eleanor's work had a far-reaching impact, touching lives in ways she couldn't have imagined. Nathaniel's role, more than just a supporter. Though Nathaniel had initially taken a step back from the public eye to support Eleanor's work, he slowly found his own path. The quiet life they had built in the coastal town had given him the space he needed to reflect, and over time, he realized that his involvement in the foundation could be more than just behind-the-scenes help. He began working directly with the men who had been part of the support groups, individuals who struggled with their own experiences of manipulation, control, and toxic masculinity. Nathaniel knew that his own journey from a successful businessman who had once been part of a corrupt system to a man finding peace in simplicity could inspire others to confront their own pasts. He held workshops for men to discuss issues of power, relationships, and accountability, teaching them to challenge societal norms and embrace healthier ways of engaging with others. Nathaniel's influence, though quieter than Eleanor's, was just as impactful. He became a counselor for many men who had felt alienated from traditional support systems, offering them a space to heal and learn from their mistakes. His work, like Eleanor's, wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about creating a better future for those who were willing to change. Together, they had become partners not just in love, but in a shared mission to transform lives. Their relationship, a foundation, built on love and respect. As Eleanor's influence continued to grow, Nathaniel's role as her partner became more defined. They were no longer just two people who had been thrown together by circumstance. They had become true equals, each playing a crucial role in the other's growth. In the early days of their relationship, there had been an undercurrent of uncertainty. They had started as lovers caught in the web of betrayal, and it had been easy to fall into the temptation of secrecy and passion. But now, as they both flourished in their respective paths, their bond had evolved into something deeper, something grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. Their love was no longer the reckless fire it had been in the past. It had matured into a steady flame, providing warmth and stability. They supported each other not only in their personal lives, but in their professional endeavors as well. Eleanor trusted Nathaniel with the intricate details of her work, while Nathaniel found strength in knowing that Eleanor was not only his partner, but a powerful force for good in the world. They had learned to communicate openly, something that had been difficult for both of them in the past. They no longer hesitated to express their fears, their desires, and their dreams. They understood that their relationship, much like their individual journeys, required constant nurturing and attention, but they were willing to do the work because they believed in each other, and in the life they were building together. Looking toward the future one. Crisp morning as Eleanor and Nathaniel walked along the beach near their cottage. They paused to watch the waves crash against the shore. The world felt quiet in that moment, as if the past had finally given way to a peaceful present. I never imagined this would be my life. A new project, empowering the next generation. As their work continued to grow, Eleanor and Nathaniel decided to expand their efforts by focusing on the next generation. They believed that lasting change began with education, and so they launched a youth mentorship program designed to challenge toxic ideals and promote healthy relationships from an early age. Eleanor worked closely with schools and community centers, developing workshops that discussed not only issues of abuse and manipulation, but also the importance of respect, empathy, and personal boundaries. These workshops became a vital resource for young people, equipping them with the knowledge and confidence to challenge unhealthy norms before they could take root. Nathaniel, drawing on his own experiences of transformation, worked with young men to teach them about accountability, emotional intelligence, and the impact of power dynamics in relationships. He used his past as a cautionary tale, explaining how unchecked ambition and toxic masculinity had once led him down a dangerous path. His candidness and vulnerability created a space for these young men to open up about their own struggles. The mentorship program had an undeniable impact. Many of the teenagers who participated later shared how the workshops had changed their perspectives on relationships and their own self-worth. Some of them even became mentors themselves, paying forward the lessons they had learned. Eleanor and Nathaniel were both deeply proud of this project. It felt like they were planting seeds that would grow into something meaningful, ensuring that the next generation would have a better understanding of healthy relationships and personal agency. Challenges. Struggles of being public figures. While the Foundation's work and their mentorship program flourished, being in the public eye had its challenges. The more successful Eleanor and Nathaniel became in their efforts, the more they were scrutinized. They had become symbols of hope, but also targets for those who still supported the old power structures that Victor had once represented. One evening, Eleanor was faced with an unexpected challenge when a media outlet published an article questioning her motives. The article claimed that she was only using her past trauma as a platform for personal gain and suggested that her work was self-serving. It was a difficult moment, and for a time, Eleanor felt the familiar sting of being misunderstood. She had faced these accusations in the past, but this time it felt different, more personal, and more public. Nathaniel, ever her rock, noticed the toll it was taking on her. He sat with her one evening, after the noise of the world had died down, and said, "We've always known that there would be people who won't understand, but you know the truth, and so do I. What matters is that we're doing the right thing, and that we're helping people." Eleanor took a deep breath. Her mind clouded with frustration. "I just wish I could make them see that it's not about me. It's about the people who need us." Nathaniel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "You've already shown them the truth. And for every person who doubts us, there are 1,000 others whose lives you've changed. Don't let their noise drown out the impact we're making." It wasn't easy to ignore the criticism, but with Nathaniel's unwavering support and the success of their work, Eleanor found the strength to push forward. She became more resolute, focusing not on the detractors but on the tangible, positive changes they were making in the world. Deepening their relationship, growing together. As they faced these external challenges, Eleanor and Nathaniel also worked to keep their relationship strong. The pressures of running a foundation, managing public perceptions, and dealing with the emotional toll of their work could sometimes feel overwhelming. But they were committed to supporting each other, not just as colleagues or partners in the foundation, but as a couple who had gone through the fires of betrayal and come out stronger. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and community events, Nathaniel suggested they take a weekend away, a quiet retreat to recharge and reconnect. They rented a small cabin in the mountains, far from the distractions of their busy lives. There, in the peaceful solitude of nature, they rediscovered a part of each other that had been overshadowed by their work. They spent long afternoons walking in the woods, talking about everything and nothing. They laughed more than they had in a while, their conversations filled with easy affection. One night, as they sat by the fire, Nathaniel turned to Eleanor and said, "I've realized something important. It's not just about the work we do or the changes we make in the world. What matters most to me is you, the person you've become. I love who you are now, and I love who we are together.